Hello and welcome everyone to the Fate of the Union podcast, a weekly review of the biggest issues in national politics given from a conservative perspective. The show will also periodically address current true crime cases from across the country. Fate of the Union is hosted by Franklin Joseph, a lawyer and constitutional conservative. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also learn more about the show and its host on Twitter at FranklinFOTU. Now, let's talk about the fate of the Union. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Fate of the Union. As always, I am your host, Franklin Joseph. The date of recording of this week's episode is June 4th, 2020. If you go back and listen to last week's episode, if you haven't already, you'll see that we discussed the video depicting the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota after being crushed under the knee of Officer Derek Chauvin. This episode will cover the protests and riots that have ensued across the country in the days since last week's episode. However, we first must review a development in the charges facing the officers. As of the recording of last week's episode, Officer Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder in connection with the death of George Floyd. As a review, third-degree murder in Minnesota is covered by Section 609.195 of Minnesota's criminal statutes. It says that whoever, without intention to effect the death of any person, causes the death of another by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind, without regard for human life, is guilty of murder in the third degree and may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 25 years. First, we see that this statute pertains to a defendant who caused the death of another person by acting in an eminently dangerous way or with a depraved mind, even though the defendant did not intend to cause the death of the victim. Many states have similar kinds of laws. Sometimes they are referred to as, quote, depraved indifference murder laws. Basically, these laws are reserved for defendants who had a reckless disregard for whether death may be a result of their actions, but still did not intend to kill anyone, like a defendant convicted of premeditated first-degree murder would have. Commentary on the law regarding third-degree murder in Minnesota is summarized like this. Minnesota also has a third-degree murder statute between second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. This type of murder is not intentional and therefore is not as severely punished as first and some second-degree murder killings. However, the behavior is so atrocious that it isn't mitigated or lowered to manslaughter in the first or second degree. On Wednesday, June 3rd, it was revealed that court documents show that the three officers on the scene, besides Chauvin, were now being charged as aiding and abetting second-degree unintentional murder, as well as aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter. Also, Chauvin's charges now include second-degree murder as well. Importantly, which we'll talk about in a moment, he still faces third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter charges as well. Minneapolis's local CBS affiliate notes that, quote, Minnesota's sentencing guidelines indicate two different possibilities for the second-degree murder charge. The second-degree murder charges will be examined under the law section regarding unintentional killings, for a similar reason that Chauvin was not initially charged with first-degree murder. The second-degree murder law has a section for intentional murders, but that's specifically for situations regarding drive-by shootings. So we're relegated to the second section of second-degree murder, which is the unintentional killing of another person. The unintentional second-degree murder law has two ways to convict someone for murder. Similar to the third-degree charge, the first way is that a defendant must have been committing a felony that resulted in the victim's death, while the third-degree charge calls for simply reckless indifference to life, presumably some kind of general criminal negligence or recklessness for others' well-being. This charge, the second-degree murder charge, requires the defendant's actions leading up to the victim's death to actually be a felony. The second way the state can prove unintentional second-degree murder is when the defendant causes the death of a human being without the intent to effect the death of any person, but while intentionally inflicting or attempting to inflict bodily harm upon the victim when the victim is restrained under an order of protection designed to protect him. I know I just hit you all with a lot of legalese, so let's break this down. The new second-degree murder charge may be problematic for the state to prove for a few reasons. Let's first look at the second way to prove unintentional second-degree murder, the so-called, quote, order of protection section. This section of the law does not expressly mention an arrest or detainment as qualifying as, quote, orders, as it's mentioned in the law. The other thorny issue here for the prosecution, pertaining to the first section, the felony section, is that they would also have to prove that Officer Chauvin was committing a felony independent of Mr. Floyd's death leading up to George Floyd's death. Although these two sections of the unintentional second-degree murder law, the felony resulting in murder part and the order of protection part, are not both needed for conviction, it can be one situation or the other or both, there are hurdles that the state has with proving both. In my opinion, it's crucial that the third-degree murder charge has remained active in this case. In bringing the unintentional second-degree murder charge, the state is necessarily trying to prove another felony in regards to the first portion of the charge, or an argument liking the arrest of George Floyd to what the law terms as an order of protection in the second method of proving second-degree unintentional murder. If the state cannot sustain this burden at trial, then the most serious charge remaining would be that of third-degree murder, thus proving the importance of what is really an easier charge to prove, but the ultimate axis between likelihood of proof and the seriousness of sentencing. While second-degree murder may be harder to prove and thus carries a harsher sentence, third-degree murder will be notably easier for the state to prove, in my opinion, and thus carries a heavier sentence than what would otherwise be left to manslaughter charges. I will, of course, keep you all updated on the developments of this case. But now let's shift our discussion to the growing riots that are enveloping the peaceful protests in many U.S. cities. What started as an ugly segment of the protests last week has since grown exponentially to result in several curfew orders in cities across the country as these cities are engulfed in flames, cars, buildings, small businesses are being crushed by bricks, blunt objects, and the like. As a result of this immense damage and the injuries inflicted by the rioters in recent days, there are curfews standing in the following cities: New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, among others. New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo had the brilliant idea of announcing the curfew at 11 p.m. on the night in which he wished the curfew to begin. That was obviously not effective. None of these orders, or the police presence in these cities, have completely prevented the carnage from the rioters, but have only succeeded to very varying degrees in limiting the damage and the injuries dealt to those in the area. This, of course, led to an all out mainstream media protectionism of the rioting. CNN's Chris Cuomo towed the company line in equating rioting with passionate protesting. In doing so, Cuomo justified the rioting by claiming that no change could be effected. In doing so, Cuomo justified the rioting by claiming that no change could be effected if the protesting was non-peaceful. Such was the case in the past, he claimed. However, what Cuomo's and others on the left are doing, knowingly I think, is giving cover for the crimes of those in the streets. Protesting by its very nature can become very uncomfortable for those not participating. It can even be non-peaceful in the sense that while it falls short of calling for violence, it nevertheless casts its opponents in biting terms, making no apologies for the tone and tenor of their words. Legal and legitimate protesting does not include setting fire to buildings and destroying property and dealing out personal injury, virtually all of which belongs to other blacks and other racial minority groups in these cities, by the way. We also saw that the author, the main proponent of the 1619 Project, was sure to go on various mainstream media outlets and try to thread the needle of claiming violence on behalf of the rioters, even going so far to say that it is some type of an insult to the protesters to claim that rioters are being violent, because the word violence is also attributable to the supposed threat that blacks are under by the police force in America. Thus, if we're using violence as a characterization of the so-called police brutality in the country, then it is unfair to also consider what the rioters are doing violent. Now, this makes just as much sense as the founding theory of the 1619 Project, which is to say it makes none at all. But you can see that there's a threading of the needle to cast aside any negative aspersions or characterizations of the rioting. And there's been a real effort from the left to not delineate between the rioters and the protesters, saying that rioting does not accurately depict the message of the peaceful protesters, but really instead they are taking on the rioters full stop and just either all out denying that this damage is being done, like Chris Cuomo has done on CNN, or like the New York Times has done in saying that regardless of the extent of the damage and injury dealt by the rioters, it cannot be negatively characterized because A, it is fighting for a so-called greater good, and B, it's a wild broadening of a pseudo self-defense claim, saying that because of the supposed onslaught of officers in America on black communities, the rioters and the looters are justified in their actions, although it is not close to time and place of any police misconduct across the country, and it is being done upon people who have nothing to do with the situation of policing in Black America, regardless of how you would like to characterize it. We also saw the return of online so-called slacktivism on Tuesday. Tuesday was termed hashtag Blackout Tuesday and was meant to show solidarity with those on the racially motivated left. In doing so, a social media member would post a solid black photo as their profile picture on various social media pages, along with the hashtag. However, as is so often the case with this kind of celebritized, vapid online activism, the wheels fell off of the movement almost immediately. White celebrities and influencers spent much of the day being lectured and castigated by the racist left on how they did not tailor their social media posts exactly the way their betters had instructed them to. Confusion with the proper hashtags and inclusion of personal messages from the white users was met with leftist rage for the duration of their day of so called solidarity. Here's a segment from the Michael Knowles show over at Daily Wire that covered the issue of slacktivism in this way and the brushback and intense rage that many white users and white influencers got for not completely falling in line and following directions.
There are many Black Lives Matter activists, the real ones, the hardcore ones, who have been going off on white liberals specifically for this kind of stuff, for this slacktivism, or for these weird, creepy cult rituals. There's one woman, I don't know her name. She was obviously irritated, and she opens up the video. She goes, "This is ridiculous. We told you, white people, what to do. We told you exactly what to do, and you screwed it up." So I think a lot of conservatives haven't been sending this video around because they're kind of put off by this idea of, you told me what to do. I don't care what you told me to do. I don't listen to you, lady. But in the middle there, even though she's a radical leftist activist, she makes a really good point about these white liberal slacktivists.
We tell y'all exactly what to do. Exactly. What to do. And y'all still find a way to do the least amount of possible. The thing that takes the least amount of effort. And not only that, you chose something that actively does harm. You chose to take the hashtags we're using to disseminate information about where the cops are, about how to keep people safe, about how to find resources, about organizing. You all take it and you fill it up with a bunch of black squares? What the are you thinking? Y'all just see somebody do some and then I don't even understand how the we can't get y'all to organize around else but posting black squares. How did y'all even do it that fast? Huh? Was it like a dumb email chain? How? I can't even comprehend how all of you all got on the same page to do the same clown ass thing.
So this goes on for like another 3 minutes, and I recommend going to Instagram and checking it out because it's very, very funny. And she has a real point. She goes, "Oh, okay. So we here at BLM, radical activists, want to radically transform society. We want to end the police. That's one of the demands of Black Lives Matter. Actually, no more police. Defund the police. We want to totally upend civil society and government." And so you heard all that. And so you posted a black square to Instagram on our hashtag that we're using to communicate our radical plans in the field in the moment. Like, thanks, guys. Look, this woman is wrong about a great many things, ideologically speaking, but she makes a great point about those white liberals.
So there you heard from Michael Knowles' segment on the black square slacktivism, standing in solidarity movement. I'm sure many of you saw a lot of black squares on various social media platforms on Tuesday. And nevertheless, no matter how hard the influencers and celebrities, the white ones, try to fall in line, whether they're doing it for notoriety and attention, or if they are genuine in their messaging, it's never good enough. And the point of the matter is it's never going to be good enough. There's always going to be a complaint. You're always going to do something wrong because in the eyes of the racialized left, you existing, you speaking on the issue, even in an attempt to be 100% in solidarity, you still have the original sin of your skin color. There's always going to be something to pick apart. At the very least, even if the hashtags and the picture and everything falls in line, there's still always going to be a segment of the left saying that you shouldn't be speaking on it at all. So we'll keep an eye on future efforts of this kind. You saw a lot of corporations and companies who really have nothing to do with racial justice put out statements that, of course, mean nothing and will do nothing to solve any of these issues. You saw Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Nike, Ben and Jerry's had a very long diatribe on the issue. Of course, none of these things will do anything to solve any racial or police problems in the country. There was actually a meme going around of a black square with white type on it, a message from, quote, brand. It was supposed to be a poke at any of these brands putting out these kinds of vapid comments. And here's just a little snippet of it. It goes, quote, "We at insert brand are committed to fighting injustice by posting images to Twitter that express our commitment to fighting injustice. To that end, we offer this solemn white-on-black JPEG that expresses vague solidarity with the black community, but will quietly elide the specifics of what is going wrong, what needs to change, or in what ways we will do anything about it. This is doubly true if insert brand here is particularly guilty of exacerbating these issues. We hope this action encourages you to view insert brand here positively without, expecting anything from us. Insert brand here. You know the ones." And I think that that's really an accurate depiction of where things are, especially from corporate America, who has no hand in the development of any of these issues or resolutions to them to the extent they exist. It's simply a very transparent and clear ploy to get on the good graces of a certain segment of their of people who patronize their business. So there's one last story I wanted to talk about, and that's the story of the statement and a lot of the sentiment pointed towards Drew Brees. We need to talk about Drew Brees, legendary Hall of Fame quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, and he is in a world of trouble with the racialized left. So how did a guy like Drew Brees, who is instrumental in rebuilding the city both in infrastructure as well as attitude and motivation and goodwill towards each other in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, how did that guy fall out of grace with the left? Let's take a look. Here's a report from Amanda Prestigiacomo from the Daily Wire that sums up Drew Brees' initial statements and the immense backlash he's facing now. On Wednesday, New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees reaffirmed his stance that Americans should not disrespect our flag. By Thursday, amid massive backlash, including from fellow athletes, the embattled quarterback was issuing an apology for his racially, quote, insensitive comments. Yahoo Finance editor-at-large Daniel Roberts told Brees during an interview that, quote, a lot of people expect that we will see players kneeling again if and when the NFL season starts. I'm curious how you think the NFL will and should respond to that. And of course, you're such a leader in the league. What is your responsibility as a leader in times like this for the rest of your teammates and players in the league? Brees responded like this, quote, I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country. Let me just tell you that I see or what I feel when the national anthem is played and when I look at the flag of the United States. I envision my two grandfathers who fought for this country during World War II, one in the Army and one in the Marine Corps, both risking their lives to protect our country and to try to make our country and this world a better place. End quote. As Prestigiacomo correctly notes, Brees was quickly pummeled by activists, professional athletes, and members of the media for his mainstream opinion, shared by millions of Americans, by the way. And this is reinforced by polling going back to the 2016 NFL season for fans' views on the anthem protest. And Brees was absolutely eviscerated. There have been athletes who, even in the time of the protest, both inside and outside of the NFL, who have had dissenting opinions on both the appropriateness and the demonstration, the timing of it, as well as the substance of what Colin Kaepernick had to say. And the pushback and the outrage that Drew Brees has faced now, I think, dwarfs any of the pushback that those athletes faced during that time. He has his own teammates just nothing short of ripping him apart. Malcolm Jenkins, who used to be on the Philadelphia Eagles, now on the Saints, told him to, quote, shut the F up. You had Richard Sherman, cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers, and one who has never shied away of injecting his obnoxiousness into any situation, said that Drew Brees should be elated for his lack of context and his lack of understanding. You had star wide receiver Michael Thomas castigating Drew Brees, other new receiving members of the receiving corps for the New Orleans Saints just taking Brees to task nonstop. This was, of course, reinforced by the mainstream left, otherwise known as ESPN in the sports world, where even Stephen A., the last member of ESPN who's not solidly conservative, although there are few, if any, left besides Will Cain, to really give any criticism whatsoever to the kneeling movement, has now apparently abandoned ship and said that really the only positive point on Drew Brees giving his opinion is that it opened up a dialogue and we got to go through this process. And of course, that's really just a cover for saying that it's good that Drew Brees got absolutely demolished because it was a lesson for him. We got to teach him about how wrong he is. This, of course, as an aside, is just another example of how, to the extent ESPN even claims to be a nonpartisan, non-politically motivated company, is just ludicrous. There's absolutely no evidence of that. Bob Iger's politics are evident throughout the entire daily schedule of programming over at ESPN. So Drew Brees, a guy who was instrumental in getting New Orleans and the state of Louisiana, with a very large black population and a large racially minority population, back on its feet, is now done for. He's roasted. I would not be surprised that if the games have fans in the stands this coming season, he gets booed mercilessly in a few stadiums, and there's going to be a lot of talking, sugar honey iced tea talking about Drew Brees the entirety of the next season. What's kind of funny about this situation, as a Minnesota Vikings fan, this was quite fun to watch team chemistry from the New Orleans Saints go completely down the toilet as you got to just watch the dumpster fire rage on and engulf the entire roster. But was also very amusing was that you saw that about inside the hour of Drew Brees getting dogpiled on, Aaron Rodgers, star quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, put out a very simple, short statement saying that kneeling and the demonstrations were important and it was never meant as disrespect, and I back them. Kind of a very short, simple statement, but personally, I think you're kidding yourself if that wasn't orchestrated to throw the scent off his own trail for either being silent up until that point on the issues being debated in the country or not saying the right thing. It was very clear that that was meant to be to get the scent off his trail and think to himself, well, I'm the next high profile white quarterback, so I better get my statement out. Drew Brees is getting crushed Tom Brady has already said something and no one really has given him any more attention or looked for further comment. So Roger's definitely doing his best to get the outrage mob to just go past his door and move on to the next unfortunate subject. So that was a little amusing in the wake of the Drew Brees backlash as well. So that does it for this week's episode of Fate of the Union. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you haven't already, please subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, and please feel free to share the program with friends or family members who may be interested. You can stay up to date with the program by searching Franklin Joseph or Fate of the Union on Twitter.com or Medium.com, and you can also reach the show's host, Franklin Joseph, on Gmail at franklinfotu@gmail.com. This has been the Fate of the Union. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.